Hi, I'm Joe Saunders with Miniature Landscape Hobbies, and in this video, we're going to look at how to apply dust and dirt effects. It seems in my discussion with other model painters that the topic of adding weathering is somewhat intimidating and is seen often as kind of a mysterious process. And I really don't blame these model painters. The techniques and variety of products that you can use to add dirt and dust effects to your models are pretty broad. And when it comes right down to it, the actual application requires some specific skills that don't really translate into other aspects of model building and painting.
I know many painters that find the topic so intimidating that they just ignore it. And, reasonably, this is a valid option. Just keeping your models with the factory fresh look can look pretty good. However, when you want to elevate your models to establish that they are from a time and place, obviously the effects of their surroundings need to be taken into account. Nothing in the field can go very long without getting dirty, and ignoring weathering effects can really detract from the visual interest of a model. In previous videos, I've covered different elements to weathering, such as chipping and rusting, but now it's time to dive in and take a closer look at dirt and dust. First, I would like to address that there are many ways to weather your models, and what I'll show you here is just my method. If it suits you, then I hope it enhances your model building skills, and if it's not your thing, that's okay. I encourage you to check out the wide array of methods for applying dirt and dust.
Before we get into the techniques themselves, we need to talk about the products. As a rule, for adding dust and dirt effects, I prefer enamels. I think that the ability to thin them and blend them with the thinners outweighs the drawbacks of the smell and gives you a level of control that's just better than what you can get with acrylics.
I tend to use the same products for most applications, and these are dust and dirt deposits, fresh mud, and dust effects by AK Interactive. Beyond this, you'll want an enamel thinner, and here I also have some Vallejo black pigments that I like to use for exhaust effects. But this of course would be optional. I would encourage you to try to mix and match any brand of dust and dirt effects, but these are the ones that I use, and I find them excellent. To prepare for adding dust and dirt to your models, you need to get the initial steps out of the way, and that would be to prime and paint as you see fit and as you would normally do for your job. Once you've got all the regular highlighting and shading done, now you're pretty much ready to start on weathering. You usually want to put the weathering near the end, sometimes pretty much as the final step, because of course the dirt and the dust will be sitting on top of the surface of the model itself. If you have camouflage effects, or chips, or scratches, of course the dirt will just layer over top of that. One thing here that's super important to consider is that when you're working with enamels, the oils and chemicals in the paint can affect the underlying layers of acrylics. So before you start with any of the weathering, do make sure that you've already put down a couple layers of varnish. I would suggest you use a satin varnish, as the effects make it a little easier to spread and blend it. But remember, at the end, you will need to go over top of everything with a coat of a matte varnish. When the varnish is dried, and make sure you give it an hour or so to be sure that it's properly set, it's time to start applying the dust enamels. I usually like to start with a mid-tone first. This is often the reverse of the way most model painting works, where you go from dark to light. In this case, I decide that Crusted dirt is just a little too dark for the green finish, so I mix a 50-50 mix of it with dust effects. This makes a nice tan color dirt, which you then go and brush on. You want to use a ratty brush because enamels are pretty difficult on good quality brushes, and go and just brush it on in random spots. You want to be mindful of where dust and dirt would collect, so a little bit on horizontal surfaces and a lot on the vertical surfaces around the tracks of the tank, or where you would expect mud and dirt to splash as it, well, drives around the battlefield. Once you've got the dust and dirt put on, it'll dry fairly quickly into a very thick and matte finish, and you want to leave it for about 5 or 10 minutes. Once it's partially set, then you can get out your thinner or mineral spirits, pour out some fresh stuff. Remember to use 2 pools, one for cleaning the brush and one for blending, and then you can begin blending. Take the brush, moisten it with the mineral spirits, dry it off so it's only just slightly damp, and then go in and begin spreading around the enamels that you've already applied. You can spread them out as thinly or as thickly as you want. You can also just use enough to wipe out any work you've done that you don't like, or you can apply a tapping motion to the surface of the model to spread it out in sort of a natural modeled pattern. Go ahead and take your time with this and let some of the color and some of the natural feature of previous weathering, such as chipping and rusting, show through to give a lot of character. Now you need to let this dry, at least for a couple hours. You're going to use more enamels over top of this, and you don't want to damage the underlying layers. By now, you're going to have a mid-tone spread out and blended nicely into the surface of your model. But dirt doesn't really get applied evenly. Sometimes you've got damp, darker dirt, and sometimes you have really light layers of dust. I like to add this in a very randomized kind of way to imply a lot of splattering. To do this, I take out my dark mud enamel, and I get out a bamboo skewer and an old ratty brush. I dip the brush in the enamel, wipe it off slightly, and then get out the bamboo skewer and flick the brush against the skewer. When it's spraying a nice pattern of mud, then I go ahead and aim the whole thing at the model in areas where I've previously built up the dirt. I then go ahead and just splatter it on. Obviously, I concentrate a little heavier on spots where the dirt would be thicker and the mud might retain some of its moisture, such as on the underside of the tank, at the front, around the wheels, and around the fenders. During this process, if you have any of the mud go on too heavily or it draws just a little too much attention, you can always go back and wipe it off using some of your mineral spirits. With the damp mud applied, I give it a couple hours to dry, and then I move on to do the same thing with my dust effects. Dust effects comes a little thinner out of the bottle, so it's a lot easier to splatter, and I use this to my advantage by spreading it over the whole model. Because dust can accumulate on the tops of a vehicle, I apply it a little more thickly than I would with the other dirt colors. Once again, if I'm not satisfied with the way it's accumulated, I can go back to my thinner and either just wipe it out by hitting it with a tapping motion or blend it into the lower layers. Now I'm pretty much at the end of the project, so I decide it's time to work on the exhausts. And though this isn't technically a dirt or a dust effect, I think it kind of belongs here. I get out some black dry pigment, get out a dry stiff bristle brush, and just go ahead and stipple some on where the exhaust would be on the vehicle. This adds just a little bit of a difference in terms of texture and color. Now I cap it all off and protect my work with a layer of matte varnish. One thing is to consider is that if you've applied the dry pigments, you want to run your varnish at a very low PSI so you don't blow all your work away. And then when that coat is on and dried, the project is finished. My models now look sufficiently grimy to convince the viewer that they've spent some time on the battlefield, and this helps with visual interest. No model exists in a vacuum, and certainly no tank in real life does either, so the spread of dirt and mud really helps it look like, well, it just belongs where it belongs.
And there you have it, my method for adding dirt and dust effects to my models. I hope it's something that can help you with your model building projects in the future. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please remember that Miniature Landscape Hobbies is supported entirely by its viewers. So please check out my links in the description. You can visit my Etsy store or you can visit my Patreon. Please remember that Miniature Landscape Hobbies is your source for model building, diorama, and wargaming content. We put our videos out weekly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell button so you receive immediate notification and you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Until then, remember to keep building life in miniature.